to, say one or two words about the event. A case for Muslims' reservations in education and employment. And I'm really, really indebted to Sujai Karampuri for accepting this invitation. This event was supposed to happen on the 17th of July, but due to his father's sudden demise, the event is postponed to today. So please join me in welcoming Sujai Karampuri to talk about Muslim reservations in employment and education. Over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So this is actually based on a newspaper article that I wrote in 2017, which says that the Muslims need reservation in India. So Naeem was kind enough to invite me, and this is my first time to Lamakaan, and here it goes. So I am an engineer, and unlike many others, I'm not a humanities background person. So my experiences have been through that path. But thankfully, I've had a father who was very politically active, part of the Telangana Movement, which he bestowed onto me. And I was quite an active activist during the Telangana Movement. So when I was in college, we went to one of the premier institutes in India in engineering. And there were about 350 to 360 students. And if I recall, there were less than 5 Muslim students in that class in that batch of 350. So as I grew from being a boy to an adult, I had this nagging question: how come there were so few Muslim students in my batch? And when I started to inquire and ask these questions, the typical and the usual answers have been, they are not interested in engineering. They do other things. They don't want to pursue studies or the higher education. They take up other activities, and they get into the labor too fast, too soon. So these were some of the typical answers. But when I look back to the history of some of the affirmative actions, aren't these the same excuses that were given in case of blacks in the United States? Exactly the same. When you go into the arguments and study what were the arguments against affirmative action, the arguments were very similar. They said blacks are not predisposed for certain education. Blacks do not have the same aspirations as the others do. Aren't these the same that were given as excuses before the reservations were given to Dalits? It's the same. So when you go back and read some of the anecdotes that were used to, say that we don't need affirmative actions, and relate it, you see that the same answers are given today. So when you look at some of the numbers speak for themselves. So for example, of course, these are a little bit old numbers, but they have not changed significantly. If you take IAS and IPS, there is only 3.5% Muslims, whereas their population representation in India is 14.3 as per the last census, and it should be little higher now. And if you take any premier college, in undergrads only 4% are Muslims, and in postgraduates only 2%. And there was a study conducted across IT industries before they were banned. This was one of the last ones that they did. They found out that in IT industries in Bangalore, Muslims constituted only 2%. So the numbers keep on going like this. And if you see even the current trends, for example, the ruling party, BJP, doesn't have a single Lok Sabha member who comes from Muslim. None of the state assembly also, they don't have a Muslim. But even if you see the number of MPs, right now it's about 24. It's the lowest, constituting only 4.4%. Then even in the UPSC, only 51 students out of 1,000 And if you take a look at the Economic Times report, the directors and senior executives across the 500 BSE companies, Muslims constitute in the senior executives only 2.67%. Even the representation in institutions of national importance like IITs, NITs, IIM, it's 1.92%. So the numbers keep going on like this. And what it suggests is there is a clear case of underrepresentation of Muslims across education and employment in India. So now I would like to talk about one of the histories of India and how we came about. So in 1951, after the First Amendment, we started to see the Indian Constitution in action. We started off like the West. We said it's individual and a state. And this individual negotiates his or her rights with the state, and that's the basis of the Western democracy. And for some reason, we thought that's how we wanted to get started. But the minute we started to function as a new democracy, we started to had to realize that there is an identity called group identity. And we were very reluctant to accept a group identity, because whenever we try to touch the subject of group identity, it contravenes an article in Indian Constitution, which is the Article 15 and 16, which says that nobody should be discriminated on the basis of caste, creed, sex, religion, and so on. The minute you touch this subject, what happens is any preferential treatment based on a group identity is struck down in the court, because any preferential treatment can also be seen as discriminatory towards others. That's how we got started. Now, the first one was in 1951, when Madras High Court struck down the reservations for the SC and STs. And that's when the first amendment was brought in, saying that we will override the Supreme Court decision, and we will come up with the concept saying that there are certain groups which are going to get these reservations, and they will not be violative of the individual liberty and violative of Article 15 and 16. So what were we doing is we were trying to accept the fact that there is something called a group identity in this country, reluctantly, and we started going about doing social justice. The first act of social justice was to create reservations for SCs and STs. See, if you ask a common man back then, or a politician or a leader, saying, do SC, STs reserve some kind of a preferential treatment? The answer might have been, yeah, I think we do. But then the Constitution says, no, it cannot be. And therefore, what do we go about? So through the Act of Parliament, through the constitutional amendments, we brought in the concept of the SC, ST reservations by honoring, whether we admit it, but it's a group identity. We call it scheduled caste, we call it scheduled tribe, but they are actually the lower caste. It's an identity. You're born into it. It's an identity that you are raised with. And that's how the society says you are a Dalit, you are a lower caste. Now, did India stop at that? There was another group identity, language. Nehru was very reluctant to carve the states based on language, because he thought by that, doing that, we are going to admit as India that we recognize an identity called language. He didn't want to do it. But 1953, Andhra State Poti Sriramulu movement, he concedes. After that, in 1956, the entire SRC, if you think about it, was based on linguistic division of the states. So look what we did as an India, as country. We first reluctantly agreed that there is a group identity called lower caste, SC, ST. We went about giving them reservations. Then we went about admitting slowly to ourselves that there is a group identity called language. And then we gave carved states based on that. Within that language, we even went into the dialects, and we allowed for the states. Then look at Northeast. Ethnic identity, very clearly honored in Indian Constitution. so many provisions are created for recognition of an identity. It's a group identity. So India journey, if you see, while we did honor the individual liberty and the freedoms, we also took care of the group identity treatments, because we had to slowly realize that in this country, just because we created a great constitution doesn't necessarily mean we can stop people discriminating other people based on their identity. And there is a socio-economic disadvantage that is created because of that identity, and we need to come up with our own ways of dealing with it. That is the history of India. Now, gender, the same thing. Is gender-based reservations violative of the Article 1516? If today we will say, no, it's not. It's easy to say it. But back then, we had to actually deal with the Constitution on this. So today we recognize gender, we recognize language, we recognize caste. Even when it came to OBC, we did what we had to, use all kinds of constitutional provisions and Act of Parliament to accord reservations for OBC. We have dealt with all of them. There is one identity that has not been dealt with, that is religion, because there is this history of a taboo attached to religion. We are completely okay to say that, oh, there can be preferential treatment for women. Yes. Preferential treatment for lower caste. Yes. But preferential treatment to religion, oh my God, sorry, we can't use that word. Why? That's because actually, if you really think about it, there is an innate reluctance to accept it, because there is a small history to it. Because during the British time, we had this religion-based electorates, and which led to the partition of India. So therefore, any reference to religion is seen as a taboo. But what is happening because of that is that we have a very discriminatory society that has come about after 75 years, in which there is a massive segregation that is happening as we speak. And unfortunately, or what, I don't know if that is the case, but even the elite in the Muslim community do not want to admit that there is a segregation happening, that there is a discrimination happening, there is an underrepresentation that has come about because of this discrimination. So, for example, I will talk about a survey that was done in the Delhi nursery school. And it says out of 92 private schools, as many as 20 admitted no Muslim child, and 17 admitted only one Muslim child each. And an activist writes, less than 0.5% of Muslim children have been admitted in the schools of Muslim. So there is a segregation. If you think about segregation, segregation is the basis for discrimination for blacks in the United States. It's a separate schools. Oh, you have your own schools, we have our own schools. That's discrimination. So the fact that the housing communities are divided along the religion, the fact that the schools are divided along the religion is the basis for the discrimination. So according to the Sachar report, the socio-economic status of Muslims is lower than that of OBCs and little higher than that of SC/STs. So 75 years later, this is the stark reality that Muslims find themselves little higher than SC/STs but lower than OBCs. In every I would say, domain and area, the premier colleges, again, very low. The banks disbursement, the Muslims get about 2/3 of the rest. The representation in the media is very low. There was a time when you could have an anchor who is a Muslim, and suddenly one day he disappears. So the public discourse has made the religion such a taboo subject that we are not ready to even open the topic of saying, hey, let's discuss this. So this came about through my own discussion with few people, saying, how do we say a particular identity qualifies for discrimination? Because people ask, is the word minority good enough? No, not at all. Because Sikhs, Parsis, Brahmins could be minority, but they don't deserve reservation. Why? How do you answer that? So to that, you need to go and check few small fundamentals. We all have stereotypes, but not all stereotypes result in discrimination. For example, stereotype. Germans are stickler for time. Japanese do in a very disciplined manner. They're actually positive stereotypes. Not every stereotype is negative. There are biases, there are prejudices. You may say things like, oh, all lawyers are liars, all politicians are corrupt. It's a prejudice, but that doesn't necessarily result in discrimination. Only few biases and prejudices tend to result in discrimination, and they tend to become that only when they become systemic, when they become institutionalized, when they become so prevalent that it is the common theme across the society, which is resulting in underrepresentation. Now, underrepresentation is the key word for affirmative action. Now, a lot of people ask me this question when I speak about it. Oh, if we put affirmative action, will that stop the discrimination? No, it doesn't. Human beings cannot be changed. Will it stop the biases? No, it cannot be. So what does the affirmative action or the reservations actually address? They address only one thing, that is the group underrepresentation. And the hope is that when we go about correcting the underrepresentation through the reservations, the socio-economic status of that particular group identity improves, and the hope is that that will slowly alleviate the biases and the prejudices when they see people next to you all the time. So now people ask me the question, oh, reservations are not effective. Are they not effective? So here I just talk about the SC/ST reservations because there is data available for that. SCs comprise 16.6% today and 8.6% STs, though their reservation is 15 and 7.5 because we took the population of 1951 for this. But in higher education, SCs in 1970, 7%, 1990, 7.8, 2016, 13.9%. Over a period of about 45 years, their percentage increased from 7% to 14%, doubled in higher education. Clearly, reservations are effective. In ST, the higher education, 1.6% in 1970 became 5% in 2016. It increased more than 3 times in case of STs. The same thing with the literacy rate. What was for SCs 10.27 in 1961, it is 66% in 2021. The Indian average is 74. ST, 8.53% is now 67%. The average is 74%. It's very clear that the brute force method of reservations actually brings about the correction, and the correction is only about underrepresentation. Today, the atmosphere has changed, unfortunately, so much through the right wing, the Hindutva politics, where instead of talking, hey, this particular religion is underrepresented, we are actually turning it upside down and saying this particular religion is appeased. It's appeased. The word is appeasement. Sorry, but giving me Hajj subsidy is not appeasement. It doesn't do anything to me, to be very honest. I need reservations. That helps this particular religion. Now, there is a taboo word that I see amongst OBCs. The yuppie OBCs are the first ones to say, oh, nobody should have reservations. There is this elite blacks in United States who stand against reservations. Do you know why? Because it makes them feel a bit inferior, saying, oh, my community does it deserve reservation? I'm not going to be admitting the fact that I deserve reservation. And that is usually the enemy most of the time. So today, many of the elite Muslims do not like to hear the word reservations for Muslims for the same reason, because they don't want to admit to themselves that they deserve reservations, as if it's like a word of saying that I'm admitting I'm inferior. But that's the exact need of the hour, that you don't fight for yourself. Never. You fight for the others who need this. And they may be sharing the same group identity as yours. And that is one of the things that is required. And having said that, if you look into the Constitution and how we go about doing this, there is a will. If there is a will, there is a way. And we have done that. SC/ST reservations, violative of Article 15-16, we bulldozed it. The First Amendment, Nehru bulldozed it and made it happen. And today we see great results. When it came to the Mandal Commission, OBC reservation, huge outcry against it. And it was violative of some of the constitutional principles. But yet, we bulldozed it and we made it happen. Now, if you take a look at even the gender reservations, women reservations, same thing. So when it mattered, we through the act of the parliament, we could get social justice done. Now, there is a cap called 50%. Who made this 50%? I don't know. Why is it 50%? I have never heard or I have never read any scientific basis for 50% other than the fact that somebody, the judge, thought 50% looks kind of nice. To be honest, what is 50%? How did you come up with 50%? What is, in a country where the OBC, SC/ST put together is 69 to 75%, why do you stop at 50%? Who said it has to be 50%? There is no scientific basis for that. And Tamil Nadu, again, 9th schedule, you can bulldoze it. You can bulldoze the constitution. You can bulldoze the parliament and get 69% reservations. So who stops? What is there to stop? And just because of this 50%, states put this thing saying, oh, Muslim reservations cannot be created extra because we are hitting the cap. So that's how, we got this 4%. That too, very squeamish, very, very wishy-washy 4% in some states. If you go about looking at it, if it's 14.3%, today there is a need for 14.3 or maybe 15 because the new census would give a different number. 15% reservations for Muslims in education and employment. And a lot of people, I think we are already aware, but for the sake of repeating, why education and why employment? Why not sports? Why not arts? Why not music? Because they make this joke saying, oh, there will be a cricket team with so many and all that. Because education and employment, this is not me saying it, it's the definition of affirmative action across the world, including United States, are the basis for which a person or a family can improve their socio-economic condition. They are not considered privilege. Education and employment is not privilege. It's the basic, the ability that a state has to give to a common man and his family by which he can improve his socio-economic condition. And that's why it's education and employment. And that's where this particular need is there. And we have to start this discourse. This particular religious, the notions have to take on the Ambedkarite philosophies and principles. It's the Ambedkarite principles are not just relegated or confined to the SCs and STs. How we proved it. We proved that it has to be extended to gender. We proved that it had to be extended to OBCs. There are so many identities which have reservations. Language, it's a reservation. When you create a state and you say that the people of this state are entitled to the jobs of this state, you're actually saying that that's a language, welfare mechanism. You go to Northeast, it's very complicated with so many classifications giving so many privileges to so many identities. We are doing ethnic based policies. The only thing that is missing today, according to me, is religion. And that is because we have this bias and a word of taboo attached to it. I think we need to dethrone that. We need to forget the past of the partition. It's too long, too way in the past. The stark reality is that it's facing us right in our face. This is a huge problem. if we don't touch it and we don't deal with it right now, we are going to have situation like Bangladesh, because the social anger is going to spill out onto the streets. This is not conducive at all for if this country has to progress. It has to be dealt today, and this entire Hindutva narrative has to be dethroned. Even the Congress, when I talk to them, they're extremely squeamish the minute this topic is raised, and they politicize it. Forget the politics of it. Just look at the data. The data speaks for itself. There is a stark underrepresentation that's going on in this country. It has to be addressed, and we have been given with one of the best social engineering tools in the history of mankind, called identity-based reservations. According to me, identity-based reservations that India implements should be given a Nobel Prize, because can you think of any country on this planet who could overturn the bias and the prejudice of 2,000-year-old caste system, where the difference was so high, and yet we could overcome a lot, I would say. Of course, there is much more to do in just 75 years through the mechanism called identity-based reservations. And why are we shying away from extending that to one community today which deserves it the most at this point of time, and that's Muslims in India? So with that, I think I don't know, I didn't structure it. I wanted to say a few things that I wanted to say, and then I will leave it up for any of you to ask me any of the questions that you have. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so that was
That's
really
my daughter.
brilliant. Yeah.
That's my daughter.
Yeah. So we do have some time for question and answer session. So those who have any questions, they can raise the mic. We'll come to you.
So the way I understand reservation in India, so this is mostly because of the historic discrimination that was dealt to castes in India. So that's my understanding. So basis on that, the reservation was implemented. So my question to you is: so when we consider reservation for Muslims, so is that based on some discrimination, some historic discrimination, or is it current discrimination? Okay. So if it is current,
yeah. So it's actually, I think we have been taught. According to me, I think nobody taught us why we had reservations. That's my understanding. Because if you really go about it, the key word is a prejudice, a society that practices, that leads to underrepresentation. See, underrepresentation is what reservations addresses. Now, what it has, whether it is historic, 2,000-year history, in US it was 200 years history of slavery. It was not 2,000. So, is there a time limit that it has to be at least 2,000 years? I don't think so. 75 years is good enough. That's my first answer. The second answer is there a documented case of prejudice and bias and discrimination like how it was for caste? And is that the only criteria that you are going to go about? Then how does the gender come into picture? Because it's very difficult to, every society has discriminated women too, but yet we have reservations for, then how do you go about OBC? It's very gray area, the OBC, because some areas, the OBCs are not as discriminated, but there is underrepresentation. So the 75 years of what we have witnessed in this country is good enough. I would say that even 30 years of what we witness is good enough. If there is a stark underrepresentation and the basis for it is discrimination, you can see discrimination with maybe not as systemic or as documented, but what about the hijab ban? Isn't that a form of discrimination when you say a girl who wears hijab is not allowed into the school, but that's like a law? But should everything be a law? Isn't the societal behavior good enough? You don't have to cite a law to say that this is discriminatory law. The practices are good enough to say that there is a discrimination. if I don't want to go open up a topic, but there is a clear case to prove that in the last 75 years, the discrimination is the fundamental reason that has led to the underrepresentation of Muslims today. It's very easy to make a case for that. But the best spokesman for a case for reservation is the fact that a certain community is underrepresented. And the underrepresented is data. It's clearly in every case, in every domain, there is an underrepresentation. And that's good enough.
What's your take on the question of merit? So we have seen lots of protests in the US recently where against DEI as well. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's a different topic altogether. I don't believe in the merit the way we defined ourselves. Sorry to say this, but even I was a young boy and we scored high ranks to get into the premier school. We thought, it's all about subject marks and all that, but that's bullshit. To be honest, there is no such thing called absolute merit. There is no such thing called absolute merit. Merit always is a function of who you are and what kind of background you have had, what kind of opportunities you have had. It's a function of all of that. So look at a woman. Woman in rural India has to deal with so many things in addition to, and therefore you say that your background makes us feel that you need to have a little bit of a push. Preferential treatment is that. And today, the Muslims deserve that because they come from a background wherein, think about it, hijab. Yeah, on one side, hijab ban is discriminatory, but you can understand that sending a girl child to school is such a big deal. And the girl child has to combat so many things. That is that is a disadvantage to start with. So you can, if you document the disadvantages, there are so many.
So you're also involved with the startup space as well. So
I will not take the questions on startups. Sorry, because that leads to a different topic. I'm sorry.
It's related to reservation. Just so what I'm asking is, so would you consider reservation for a Muslim entrepreneur as well? So
no. See, I would not touch upon few topics like some people can ask me the political reservations, like the number of seats in MPs and other things. I'm not touching those topics. Sorry, I'm being, actually, if you really think about it, India has been quite unique, great, and India has been quite brutally enforcing reservations, which many countries have not been able to, but there are places where they try to emulate, like Brazil, Bolivia. Bolivia calls it a plurinational. So we were talking to the Bolivian ambassador, and it's a beautiful concept. They think that Bolivia is a collection of nations. It's called a collection of nations, right? So they have their own concept of how they do it. Indonesia has their own concept of how to do it. But I think one of the most robust mechanism that I know of is India. I think India could become an example setter to so many countries. And therefore, that is all the more reason, because there is no other country as diverse as India. That's another thing. It's very difficult to contain India into one single nation without these mechanisms. It's impossible. And what we are doing today is that we have such a beautiful socio-engineering tool at our disposal, and yet we are reluctant to apply it to the one of the deserving group identities in India.
Thank you, Sujai. Amazing insight and good research. My question, I'm Sanjay Gadale. My question to you was, what made you narrow down amongst all the communities or all the religions onto Muslims? Was it because it was the biggest amongst all of them, all the minorities?
No.
Okay, no. There are two, three parts to the question. There's a flow over here.
Yeah.
That's the first part. I wanted to just look at the why and the what and the where, when, who, and how story of this entire story. And I compliment you that your young daughter is sitting through your session and she's also understanding and assimilating these topics so early, which is a great thing that you're doing as a parent. Compliments to you. This is a existential problem, and one thing positive that I heard from you saying that even though the faulty way that India has been able to implement it, we still are better off than the rest of the world, which has not even considered it.
Yes.
So that's a sure positive. Now, was that enabled to a certain extent by our founding fathers in the vagueness that they brought into those conditions in the Constitution, which allowed this to come into the back door? You see, now the latest thing that we are actually facing, or also taking into account, is the fact that we are also trying to get in and accommodate women reservation. The 50%, yes, there is no logic. In fact, that is why we need to get in the science into the entire matter to be able to get the proportionate representation in. And that is why people like us have to come into play and actually bring in research and start doing the real fairness of the entire exercise. So do you think that the Constitution was, to a certain extent, kept vague on this topic so that we could actually accommodate this in the long term?
Okay.
But
so,
that part is again leading us to another problem.
Yeah.
That by not focusing on building up core competence in our primary education system, we have actually lost that 70-year advantage of having included reservations as a part of our social development equation, components in our equation. How would you like to comment on that?
Yeah. So there are two questions. Why did I pick on only Muslims? I'll tell you very clearly. Okay, so I'll go back to the question that the gentleman in T-shirt asked me. Who are the people who are today's Muslims? There are various accounts, but there is one account which says that 75% of the current Muslims are actually converts from the lower castes of India. So just because they switched religion didn't change their socio-economic situation. So all the more reason, number one. Now coming to the question that you asked, why only Muslims? Very simple. Underrepresentation. Data. Take Sikhs. Sikhs are overrepresented. Jains, overrepresented, though they are a minority. Christians, overrepresented, though they are a minority. Yeah, so that's why I said data is the best tool to talk about. Sikhs are overrepresented in India. So if you take their percentage of share of population compared to their participation in education and employment, they're overrepresented. You take the Jains, they're overrepresented. Yes, absolutely. There is a survey that is conducted. It's a socio-economic survey that NSSC, which does it every year. It's very clear. All the other religions other than Muslims in this country are overrepresented. Within Hindus, we go by caste, and we know exactly each of the castes and whether they are overrepresented or underrepresented. That's the reason I keep using the word underrepresentation, because underrepresentation is the only mechanism that is addressed by the reservations or affirmative action, not discrimination, not bias, not prejudice. Two, it only works at group identity, never at individual level. This is another big problem people have. They think, oh, I and he. The minute you go I and he, there is a problem. It's not about I and he. It's a group identity. It always works at group identity. It never works on an individual basis. This is the fundamental reason why it contravenes the Article 15 and 16. Because the minute you push it into individual level, of course, any preferential treatment is discriminatory. So you will be completely helpless as a society to combat any group identity based policy, if you want to implement them, welfare. You cannot even have reservations for Muslims if you go by Article 15 and 16, because it clearly says gender. So that's number one. Number two, you need to understand, India is a sum of two things. Of course, the Constitution, but what happened after that as a set of compromises. We look down upon the compromises, but each of the compromise we made is a hallmark celebration, according to me. First compromise on languages. Nehru thought it was stupid idea to divide based on languages, but it helped. Two, we thought of English as the official language was such a stupid compromise. We even discuss it negatively today. Some people, we should have had Hindi as the national language. Sorry, English was a compromise. Thankfully, it helped so many regions to have a level playing field. Otherwise, it would have been like Indonesia. Many other countries I can cite. But all and each of those compromises which came about through diversity. What was the function of India is its immense diversity. It's almost like Africa and Europe put together into one single country. It is so diverse. And the diversity pushed and pulled and pushed and pulled us and made us accept those compromises. And because of that, it's a sum of the it's two things. It's the Constitution and it's the sum of our experiences after the Constitution was framed and based on various amendments and laws. It was challenged. And, we created this called ninth schedule and we pushed them into the ninth schedule to protect them from the Supreme Court. We had to do it to bring social justice. Like otherwise, Zamindari Act. The Zamindar Act, we could do an effective abolition in this country, but not in Pakistan. The reason is we had that First Amendment and the ninth schedule to our, it's a compromise. We look down upon the compromise. But if you really think about it, those compromises were amazing compromises. Each of those compromises, whether it was adoption of English or whether it is ninth schedule, it helped abolition of Zamindari Act. Today, we have been able to create this somewhat equitable society than most other countries, probably because of that. See, I'm being very positive about India. Actually, if you give me another podium and talk negative things, I can talk a lot. But I'm just being nice to myself here. So it's a sum of both, I would say. See, if you take the American history, they call it Missouri Compromise. All of them are called compromises. They're called compromises and they read in the history as a positive thing. I would like our history to be read like that, saying, English compromise, the ninth schedule, Mandal compromise. We don't read it as positively, right? Yeah, we read it as negatively. Mandal Commission is a blot, according to a lot of people, but it's a historic compromise that helped India. So I think it's just our bias. And then you add all of those biases and suddenly come up with this concept called Muslim-based reservation. And the first word is, oh my God, I was coming here and I put it in a group and somebody said, Sujai, what happened to you? What is this? What are you doing to this country? Right? I mean, that's how they look at this subject. But it's time. It's really the time to take it head on. And there has to be a very concrete political discourse. We need to start debating it without being squeamish about it. The problem with a lot of people is they're very squeamish about it. The minute you hear the word reservations, they think it's as if like, it's political, people use it for political thing. No, not at all. It helped a lot of people.
Thank you very much. That was a very informative and useful presentation. I'm just wondering why you never mentioned the question of caste among Muslims. It seems to me that the largest proportion of Muslims are actually OBCs. And they are various different kinds of work people, with crafts people, weavers. Weavers are a very large group. And that your claim in OBC reservation should have been something that the Muslim community pushed. But there is a strange reluctance among Muslims to admit caste. And the danger is that if there is, let's say there is a 15% reservation for Muslims, that it will be the Muslim upper caste who takes it. And unless Muslims are also open enough to acknowledge this question of caste and to participate in the caste discussion, we're going to have that kind of negative undertow always. Now, Christians, one of the reasons why Christians continue to be well represented is that a large number of Christians, the huge majority of Christians, are SCs, they're scheduled castes. And they have taken, it's not formal, but they declare themselves as SCs, and they have taken the reservation that was due to them because there is prejudice against them and that they don't find a place in society. So I think this, I'm just pointing to this strange sort of ambivalence among Muslims, among elite Muslims who are the spokespeople for Muslims by and large, to, to engage the question of caste among Muslims.
So I completely agree with you. The only reason I didn't touch upon that subject is see, I'm a Hindu, right? And right now, at this particular juncture, I'm just making a case as a Muslim reservation as a box. But the minute that it has to be implemented, what you said has to come about. It cannot be that the entire Muslim is seen as one single entity because, to the question that he asked, there is a caste system in Muslims. And there is a need, as you rightly said, for them to accept that there is indeed a caste system. Now, the reason why they don't tend to do it, I don't want to talk about it, is the same thing. Oh, the minute you are in Islam, we do not recognize caste the way it is in Hinduism is one of the reasons. The second reason is the elite Muslims who may not want to accept the fact that there has been a discrimination within the religion in itself. So I think it requires that kind of a discussion, and there has to happen. But the first thing is even to admit as an Indian that a religion, and there is a section which has to have these reservations. And on one side, we tend to write notes and articles saying that bulk of the Muslims are actually converted from the lower caste in India. Now, just because you moved from one religion to another religion, has the discrimination completely disappeared? Not at all. We can see that in Christians. We can see it in Buddhists. We see that they carry the discrimination even when they change the religion, right? So it is just a little bit of a palliative, comfort by changing the religion, but I personally do not believe that they can escape it. So you're absolutely right. And if you really think about it, we tend to do that. Even when we give the 4% reservations in some of the states, it's actually castes within Islam, within Muslims. They're actually the castes. So when you go about and you divide that 14% into 2%, 3%, 4%, 6%, you have to do the same thing that you did for the SCs and OBCs. You went about, see, OBC is not a single category, right? It's like 2%, 2.5%. There is section called A, B, C, D, and all that, right? The same has to be applied to the Muslims as well. I mean, I completely agree with what you said. It is just that I didn't talk about it. I tell you this, you need to understand that usually the reluctance comes from within, many a times. The elite of a particular community are not ready to accept that my community deserves reservations. And this was documented. This was documented in case of United States, where the elite blacks were very, very squeamish and reluctant to accept reservations for, even today. If you bring a black person onto any news channel and say he's very squeamish about it. Even the President Obama is squeamish about it. Many people are very squeamish about it. So the same would apply to the Muslims as well.
Yeah, Sujai, very quickly, and thank you so much for that very informative and also quite statistical in nature this talk was. I was keenly, listening to your talk. There are a few things that have actually, come up in my mind. Whenever we talk about reservation, there is some kind of hesitancy. But whereas we often talk, and all over the country and elsewhere in the world as well, there is this thing called diversity and inclusion. So how do we look at diversity and inclusion from the lens of reservation? Is there an etymological or maybe the nomenclature is a problem? That's one. The other thing that we have spoken, in fact, over the WhatsApp messages also, now there is a stumbling block that allows Muslims to enter into reservation because Supreme Court is dead against it. So is there a legal, tool or mechanism through which this stumbling block can be removed? So what is your take on that?
So I think my personality, in the Indian context, I do not have the same support for the words like diversity and inclusion. They're good words, they're corporatish words. It is like whitewashing everything, and they want to kind of be appearing to be accommodative kind of words. That's very clear. Call them reservations, call them Muslims. Don't call the words minorities, because I don't know what is minority is, because Brahmins are minority. What the hell? I don't even know how to use those. I think it's very clear that those mechanisms that corporates use and like American firms use, Indian firms use, they're not going to get any results, because the bias exists. So I'll give you a recent study was done wherein one agency took the same resume, word to word, changed the name of the person, Deepak Sharma, and some Sheikh Mohammed, whatever, right? And they sent it to for the interviews. Do you know that the number of calls that the Hindu resume got is like substantially higher compared to the calls that a Muslim candidate got for the same resume? Isn't there a bias? Of course there is a bias. And then if there is a bias, you want to talk about diversity and inclusivity, saying be nice, according to me, nobody's going to be nice. If they were to be nice, they should have been nice long ago. The fact that you are here today, that means people are not inherently nice. I can tell you with one thing with full confidence: people are inherently discriminatory. It comes through evolution. We stereotype, we bias, we do prejudice, we discriminate. It comes through nature. We are very discriminatory as human beings. It takes a lot of training, education, awareness to be non-discriminatory. Now, there is only to an extent that you can cajole somebody to be non-discriminatory. But at one point of time, you have to say it's a legal mandate. Bus ke aage, you have reserved seats for women, I don't care. Somebody has to say with brute force. Only then the men will not sit in that particular place. Otherwise, they would go and sit in there. So it's according to me, the diversity, it's not the time and place for diversity and inclusivity. And let's not dilute it using that, because we will not get any results out of that. India is a extreme, highly racist, discriminatory, patriarchal, misogynist society. Let's admit it, we are that. But at the same time, let's also celebrate the fact that we have the best social engineering tool on the planet. Let's use it. So there's nothing wrong in it. I think any squeamish word will dilute it. You will give yourself another 15 years and you will say that this whole diversity inclusivity program has failed. That's what is going to happen. My uncle used to say that Indians are amazing. Like the minute a rule is framed, they know how to subvert it. So we know how to subvert it. So let's not, I'm not gonna, wishy-washy do it. Sorry, that's my personality. But that was your first question. The second question, I forgot.
Stumbling blocks, the legal framework.
Yes.
Yeah.
See, as I said, where there is a will, there is a way. Tell Rahul Gandhi that we will vote for you only if you do a constitutional act and increase the percent. See, let him do the caste census. Caste census will yield some surprising results. After that 50% thing is gone. Once the 50% thing is gone, you have room for everything else. I think, it has to be done properly. No. It never worked. Look at what we did with that 4% thing. It gets struck down and all that. It doesn't work. Let's put it in so I think maybe 2029, that should be a precondition for him, that he should do this. And then maybe we get some results. We have done it in the past. Mandal Commission. People thought it could never be passed, but somebody did it. Yeah, so. I think but you need to create the discourse. You have, people have to talk about it. People have to, in the beginning, first time sunne mein thoda dar lagta hai, but after you keep repeating, people will start becoming, you need some supporters, right? And it takes time for people to get educated in these things. In the language, the lingo, the discourse, the terminology, it takes time. Yeah. I don't know anything about it, how realistic, but I have to tell you this. India is a great example of compromises we have done again and again and surprised ourselves again and again. To be very honest, my dad used to think that Telangana would never happen. But it happened. Like that, so many things we thought would... Come on, we thought up ki bar 4,000 par. We thought it was given. We surprised ourselves. So, let's have faith. No, see, it all starts like that. But, you have to rally and create support within and create those things. And then one day it's a mainstream demand. It can happen. At least I believe that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
My daughter. Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, guys.
Sorry, Sujai. I'm Kiran.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I'm Kiran. Okay.
Last one.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's appreciate that, you have a different thought. Okay. Actually, the thing is, there is one specific word, okay, which is contradicting what you have said. Okay, whatever the gender thing, where we have will, we can do the things, gender thing, language thing, and everything. But whereas this comes to the religion thing, okay, it is not just the articles. I am not well versed with the articles and the constitution thing at all. But yeah, the one word which contradicts this particular thing is the secularism. The secularism won't allow the the religious-based discrimination.
Sorry. Since you have asked, secularism by no way obviates or precludes or stops religion-based reservations. No, it doesn't. So, justice, individual liberty, great, thank you very much. But then we also had to deal with gender-based. So, in every aspect, social justice can be done on a group identity, irrespective of the word secularism, irrespective of the word called, we are going to be a country without caste. Yeah, we don't want caste, but we deal with caste as part of reservations.
Yeah, but that is something.
But can I ask you one question? On some cases we don't want to use the word religion, but when it comes to CA, NRC, we explicitly use the word religion. So, so we are being a little bit hypocritical about it. Even the parties which talk about this, first of all, the parties which talk about this they don't even want secularism to be in the first place. So, I think let's not get caught in our own definitions. But there is nothing in secularism which obviates or precludes or negates the concept of reservations for Muslims. Nothing.
Yeah, actually the reasons which I feel, which I
and one more thing, Indian Constitution is not about this or this. It is always about and. Social justice, secularism, individual liberty, just so it's an and. We need excellence, yes. Merit, of course. Capitalist, yes. But welfare, yes. We are and. We are and society. Yeah. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I'm just quickly going to take half a minute to thank profusely Sujai for agreeing to give this wonderful talk, and it was really educative. And we are so grateful that you have come today and spoke on the case for reservations for Muslims in education and employment as such. We look forward to have you one more time. And thank you, Sujai, for your time. And we also thank the audience for their precious time. And once again, I apologize on my personal behalf and also on behalf of Lamakaan for the inordinate delay. So we will have you one more time. And have a good night. Thank you.